Welcome to Season 2 of WitchLit, a space to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. Emma Kathryn is a staff writer at Witchway Magazine, the House of Twigs blog, the Stone, Root, and Bone blog, the Spiral Nature blog, and Gods and Radicals. She has spoken at a number of UK pagan events, including the Magical Women Conference in London, and has been interviewed on the Witch Daily Show podcast. Her new book is Witch Life, a practical guide to making every day magical. Emma Kathryn, welcome to WitchLit.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
I'm excited to have you on too. I feel really lucky that I've been able to talk to so many folks in the UK, just the magic of Zoom and, the internets.
I know it has done. I know it gets a bad rep a lot of the time, but, sometimes it is, it does have its uses.
Yeah, it makes the world smaller, if nothing else. So I'll take that part of it. So the first question I ask everybody, because we're a podcast about writing, and also because there's so many other ways to communicate, is why write?
That's a good question. And, I guess from always being a little kid, I was always reading. For me, books were a way of transporting you out of the mundane, and it kind of didn't matter whatever problems were going on. So like my family were really working class, lived in a very working class area. Money was tight, we were poor, and books were a way of experiencing the world. And as I grew up, I don't know, I wonder if other writers feel the same way. There's always that feeling inside that makes you want to put words down on a page. And sometimes you can't always explain it,
Yeah, it's a common answer, I think. It's just like this, you're impelled to do it somehow. So
yeah, and I think I'm a naturally introverted person on that spectrum of introvert/extrovert. I am naturally more of an introverted kind, and public talking frightens me to death. I'd rather write something than speak.
Well, it's nice thing about podcasts is you can't see who's listening, so you don't have to worry about that part of it.
Yeah, they're like podcasts are nice and intimate,
Mm-hmm. And you do a lot of different kinds of writing. So you write for blogs, you write for magazines, and then you have the book coming out. So do you want to talk a little bit about that kind of journey of writing?
Yeah, so I did my English degree, and I did it through distance learning. So I had my children quite young, but I always knew that I wanted to carry on my studies. I was always that nerdy kind of, out of all of my three sisters, I was the one, and so I started writing, and part of that degree was a creative writing element, just a small little module, and I quite enjoyed it. Anyway, fast forward a few years, and I was just on my, I used to follow this page on Facebook, and I think it was called Dear Darkling or something like that. And they had a call out for writers. And so they put on this 6-week program, and I went through that. I didn't get through, but that was the start of writing for blogs. And, so that was the start of it, I suppose.
It's, I don't, because I was familiar with your name from blogs, from Gods and Radicals, especially because I've read that for a while. And I was like, oh, well, I know who this person is. when your publicist recommended your book to me, and I was like, oh yeah, definitely. Let's get her on. Plus also my husband is from Trinidad. So he is a Caribbean immigrant to the US, a little different, but I saw the Jamaican immigrant background. And I was like, oh yes, I'm familiar. So you've been writing for blogs for a while. Mm-hmm. So what was the impetus for the book? How did that look like to get that published?
Well, I already had a couple of books out with Gods and Radicals, and they were quite different to Witch Life. Mm-hmm. And I guess really, and I think most of us, we're not just one thing, we're many different things. So, the Gods and Radicals stuff is very much about kind of, I don't know, finding your own way and being just exploring things and taking the time to kind of reclaim that sense of self. But I also am a witch. I call myself a witch. I practice witchcraft. And so I really wanted to write something that was purely just witchcraft, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I liked in the opening talking about kind of that finding a way to combine like both sides of your heritage in a way. So how did that like show up in the book for you? Like,
so for people who might not know, I also practice. So I practice a blend of traditions. Mm-hmm. I practice voodoo, which is something I see as quite separate because it has its own, that is its own thing, you know. Mm-hmm. But I also practice witchcraft, and what I generally term as Jamaican witchcraft or Caribbean witchcraft for ease of understanding, which is Obeah, which is a magical spiritual system that has its roots in West Africa, but my experience of it has been from Jamaica, but it is practiced in some of the other Caribbean islands as well. Mm-hmm. And I found that whichever one, as I was kind of exploring my path, whichever area I focused on, I always felt that I was leaving something out, you know, because I think we always kind of fall into this way of thinking that we have to be one thing or the other. And so I really felt for a long time conflicted. And so, but as I began to practice both more deeply and kind of really integrate it into my life, I realized that actually there's a lot of crossover and a lot of similarities between the two. Both are kind of a mix of high and low magic, you know, and both are kind of have aspects of folk magic. There's the herb and plant lore, so it was very easy to combine the both.
Mm-hmm. And I love the recipes for the different rituals. I love that there are some Jamaican recipes in there too.
Yes.
Like you see the British influence with like the ginger cake and then also with the dumplings and salsa. And I was like, this is that I was especially drawn to that because I'm very kitchen witchy. So I was like, oh, I've never had Jamaican dumplings. I may have to try those.
They are my favorite, you know, but my dad has this way of shaping them with his thumbs that I just cannot master. So I just have to do the round ones.
Always the way. There's like the one thing that your parents do it in a way that you just can't quite get, or your grandmother or somebody. There's always like this special way. So
I
know. So are you writing full time? Because I mean, you're writing a lot clearly, but is that your full time job or do you
No, believe it or not, it's not. My day job, I work full time in a special school, so I am a teacher, and the school I work at is autism specific. So we're just a very small independent school in the town where I live, and so I teach autistic children or children.
That is a full-time job.
Yes, but I also love it, you know. I think there's so much we can learn from kids anyway, but, you know, and I see a lot of crossovers in all kinds of things. And I think working with children is really good for developing will and patience, which are good for your witchcraft practice anyway. So. Yes,
definitely. So when do you get a chance to write? What does your writing time look like for you?
So I get up weirdly early in the morning, like, I don't know why. I get up at around 4:45 in the morning, so 4:45 a.m. And I spend like maybe an hour of the morning time before going to work doing writing related work. So it's either editing or kind of reading through or responding to emails and that kind of stuff. I'm very lucky in my job. So although it's full time, actually, because we follow the school year, I have like 14 weeks holiday, and that's at regular intervals, which really is so beneficial. And then I have weekends off as well. So, yeah.
So more regular time than probably most people who work a regular job without a schedule.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked in education for around 3 years now, and it was a complete career change for me. So before that, I worked in retail full time at a chain bookstore. And people think you work in a bookshop and they think it's going to be so good for your writing. But actually, it's not, because you're too busy. You're always doing stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
I did a retail stint for a long time. Bookstores and other things. That is not a life that leaves you anything but exhausted.
Yes, exactly. So at that time, you know, my writing was very limited. I only had a very small amount of time. And so now I kind of have that nice balance, I think.
Yeah, I know that sounds perfect, actually. So you've published a couple books with Gods and Radicals. You published this book with Llewellyn. So what are like writing goals for you? What does that look like now?
I mean, ultimately, like as much as I love my job, I guess the dream, the writer's dream, is to be able to do it as your full-time role, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess that's always in the back of your mind somewhere along the line, you know. But I think, I don't know, I guess as long as I feel I have something to say, I guess the books might just keep coming, because I think it's important that everybody share their experiences. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I really wanted to get across in Witch Life is that witchcraft can be adaptable. So, you know, it doesn't matter what tradition you practice, or, you know, whether you are, a beginner, some more experienced, it kind of doesn't really matter, because I feel like there's something in the book that can be adapted to suit your own individual purposes. And so, and I think it's always, because I think back on my experiences of reading books, you know, the pivotal books that you read and you think, yes, finally someone sees it the same way as I do, you know. And I think it's yeah, I think it's as long as I still feel I have something to give. Mm-hmm.
So what was the seed for this particular book? For Witch Life?
Well, I wrote it during the first UK lockdown in 2020. So like I was saying, my school is very small and it is for children with autism. But lots of our pupils have other diagnoses as well. And, you know, because of staffing issues and you know, vulnerable people, it was decided that the best thing we would do would be to close the school and offer remote learning. So some of our support staff, who it is their role, went to homes. So I was actually working from home at that time. And for the first kind of few weeks, it's really weird. You think as a writer that writing from home in that situation is going to be perfect, because all of a sudden you've got this time. And I found that it was really hard. Whereas before I had quite a rigid schedule. Now I had like this, could basically make my own work schedule. So I had all of this large amounts of time. And for a while, I kind of find myself slipping into this rut of not really doing anything. Mm-hmm. And so I really had to make a conscious effort. And then actually, I started writing bits down, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to put it together and see what happens, and that kind of.
So did you shop it to Llewellyn, or how did you go about like the actual publishing process?
Yeah, so I submitted it to Llewellyn because. So I think when I started, I didn't really think it would be a book as such. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe I might break it down into a series of articles, or, you know. But then actually, as I kept going, and because I think the lockdown for a lot of witches and pagans, it was a chance to kind of rediscover our practice, to kind of look at things with new eyes, with a different perspective. And so, you know, it wasn't until it started getting quite a lot that I thought, okay, this is a series of articles that is going to go on forever if I don't kind of. So I decided that I'd pop it into a book. And, you know, although I'd previously published with Gods and Radicals, because it's purely witchcraft, I kind of, I don't know, I just wanted it to go somewhere else, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so Llewellyn was the obvious choice, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I was joking with somebody recently during interviews, like there's the two big ones in the US, Llewellyn and Weiser, and then there's the ones in the UK that we are really familiar with in the States, like Troy and Moon, and
yeah.
You know. But it's it's a little, I mean, it's niche marketing, it's niche publishing. So.
I know. And I was explaining it to my partner, bless him, because, you know, he's not really into any witchcraft or magic, or is not really into paganism, is kind of what I might term agnostic or Gnostic, you know. Mm-hmm. So he's open-minded, but he's not really into anything as such. And so I was explaining to him about Llewellyn, and I was like, you know, in publishing, it is a niche market anyway, but in terms of that niche market, Llewellyn are probably the most well known, you know. Mm-hmm. If you were to ask most people, name 5 pagan or witchy publishers, I think Llewellyn would always be in those top 5.
Yeah. And I think, I came to witchcraft and paganism in the early 90s, and they were kind of the books that you could get too. It was just what was available. So
same. Yeah.
So a lot of Scott Cunningham. Those early 90 folks. Oh. So when you get your time to write, we'll say post pandemic, who knows where we are in that. But what does that perfect writing time look like for you? Do you have like a ritual around how you write, or is it just sit down and get the work done?
It used to be just sit down and get the work done. When I worked in retail, because time was of the essence. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm one of those people where I think like deadlines, I need a deadline because I tell myself I work best under pressure. And so if I have 4 weeks to do something, my natural tendency is to same for the last 2 weeks. And so that's been something I've had to kind of push against a little bit. And so, at first my writing schedule just sit down and write. But just recently, only this year, I've actually dedicated a space in my home that is just for writing. So I've got myself a little writing room now. And what I like to do is just to come upstairs and shut the door on the house and everything else. And like the whole family know that when I'm in the room and the door's closed, it's like, do not come in. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to have those boundaries.
Yes.
And then I like to spend a couple of minutes just, acclimatizing, getting, daydreaming out the window, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then it's crack on. Yeah.
The biggest adjustment for me with the pandemic was I've worked at home for years. So I would go to a coffee shop and write if I wanted to get out of the house and not be distracted by the laundry or, whatever.
Yeah.
And so that was a hard one. But also my husband came home and was working from home. So we share an office.
Yeah.
And that was really weird to have someone like in the office all day with me.
I bet. I bet. One weird thing I have to do though, and I don't know why, and I do it with articles and books, is I have to write them by hand with on pen and paper first. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I do it that way. Sometimes I'll write the whole thing. Sometimes I'll write a section and then I'll begin to type it up and edit it that way. So I guess I just don't know why I do that, but I feel I always have to.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's really different for different people. I always start on paper, because I write fiction. It's like when I start a new novel project, like the first few chapters I write by hand, and then I panic because then I realize that if I lose that, I lose everything. So then I usually switch to the computer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's so interesting to me. Like, people have that. I have to handwrite it and I have to have this pen or this pencil, just all of those little quirks around it. I always find fascinating.
I was talking to my grandma about, because every time I go and see my grandma, she lives like in a village, a couple of villages over. And so every time I go and see her, she'll ask how the writing's going. And it was only until I started writing that I found out that actually in the 70s, her and her sister used to practice Wicca in a local group. So that was quite interesting, because I never knew that before. But anyway, she used to tell me that she used to enjoy writing. And I think it's lovely how writing can bring people together. But she was writing this book in her younger days, because when she was growing up, her family used to breed Great Danes. So it was a book about Great Danes. But she also had a pet goat that used to follow her everywhere. So she was typing this book up on a typewriter. So it was all typed and handwritten, and her dad kept saying to her, look, you need to kind of think about what you're going to do with it. Are you going to send it off? And my grandma was like, no, I'm going to wait till I finished it first, and then I'm going to send it all off. But before she got to the end of the book, the goat ate it.
Oh, no.
And then she never had the heart to write it again.
Oh, see, this is an argument for having a copy of something, for backing up everything. Although I don't think I worried about goats, but now I might have to. Like, oh, the goat ate my book. That's terrible. Oh, wow. So I'm still thinking about the go. It's going to take me a minute to recuperate. When you get ready to start like with this project, like you said, you were kind of thinking it might be articles and then it turns into a book. So really pre-writing for this book was probably like, this is going to be articles, and then figuring out how to work it. So what did like researching and all that when you got into it? Because it's mostly a reflection of your practice. So did you do a lot of research, or like how did it come together?
I mean, I guess I didn't do a lot of research per se for this particular book because a lot of it is drawn from my own practice and my own interests, you know. So, but generally, I do like the whole research. Like I say, I'm a bit of a nerd and I like the whole how, you know, researching and making notes and all of that stuff. But for this one, not so much. A lot of it was drawn from my own practice, and I really wanted to kind of show people that actually it doesn't matter if you know a lot, don't know a lot, maybe you're not sure what you want to do, or because I think it's important that people really take the time to explore. And I really wanted it to be a focus on the practical side of witchcraft, because I often think that particularly for beginners, I often think that a lot of the theory stuff can be off-putting or confusing, or, you know, there's so many different opinions and ideas and concepts, so that when you're new, particularly now for the, you know, the internet is kind of a blessing and a curse because it makes information so freely available. But you know, it kind of takes an experienced eye to kind of differentiate between fact, opinion, misinformation, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think being able to explore in a practical kind of way can really allow you to work out a lot of the questions for yourself, you know?
I like that, the way the structure of the book makes it, I think, really, I love in the intro you say, you know, you can read this all the way through, or you can dip in. And I was like, I like that approach of like, here are the Sabbats and how, you know, I celebrate them. And here's a kind of a pattern for that. But then that also says like in the moon magic and the elemental magic, like it's still to give someone, I think, especially a new practitioner, like kind of a framework to think about their practice. Like I liked the book being structured like that, because it's like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel for everything you want to do. Like you find a pattern that works for you and kind of continue that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think for a lot of people, whether they would admit it or not, you know, we all live such busy lives and we all have so many constraints on our time and our resources that, you know, we have all the best of intentions. So, you know, we know Beltane's coming up. So you might think, oh, I'm going to do all of this stuff for Beltane. But then life gets in the way. And for whatever reason, you don't do most of what you wanted to do. And I think it's easy to fall into the habit of thinking, oh, well, never mind, I'll wait till next time, you know, or I'll wait till the next. And then when you get into that kind of habit, you don't end up doing anything, you know. So I wanted it to be able to be a book that you could go to every day, and not just when it's a particular Sabbath or a particular moon phase. You know, if you want to do something that day and you don't know what you want to do, you're looking, you know, for a bit of inspiration, you can go to the book, you can pick it up, have a flick through, and, you know, and choose something that suits you in that moment.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, the subtitle of the book of being practical, I think is very true. Like there's not, at no point in reading through it was that like, yeah, I have no idea where someone would get that to do this. You know, it's like stuff you probably have in your kitchen or in your house somewhere. I mean, you talk a lot about like reminding people that you do not need to go buy the most expensive thing at the most expensive witch shop in your town. Like you can go to a thrift store and get and I think it's just really helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's important that people know this stuff, because I think in society generally we place a lot of importance on having things. You know, if we look at fashion industry, for example, there's a lot of emphasis and prestige put on designer clothing, or, you know, or luxury cars or whatever, you know, and I think that can slip into our witchcraft practices as well. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with buying stuff. You know, we all like to have nice things. But I think sometimes, particularly if you are poor, and again, this is where my own personal kind of influence comes from, because for a long time, when my children were little and I was a stay-at-home parent, and we only had one wage coming in, for a long time there was nothing extra. And I think I'd be reading books or magazines or whatever, and there'd be all of these beautiful crystals and all of these luxurious oils, for example, and I just couldn't afford them. And for a long time I kind of thought, well, okay, maybe this isn't for me. But of course, witchcraft is adaptable, and you don't need anything to practice witchcraft other than yourself. So I really wanted people to see that. And I think by engaging with your landscape, whether that's a town, a city, the countryside, there's always things that you can use in that landscape. And for me, that feeds into animism and everything else.
Yeah, I do think, I do wonder, like, coming in like to witchcraft and paganism before the internet, like you came into it through books usually, or through other people. And then now a lot of, people who are either actually young witches or young in their practice who are come to it through social media or blogs. And there is a lot of emphasis on stuff. I mean, because it's a visual medium for the most part. And you're looking at, their fancy crystals with their shiny filters. And you're like, that doesn't have to be. Sometimes all you need is some salt.
Yeah, and I think as well, we've all seen those Instagram pictures and they look amazing, someone's beautiful altar and it's got all of these beautiful things. And, it is the altar of your dreams in an ideal world. But actually, in the real world, that photo or that reel has taken a long time to set up, I've done a few pictures of my book for my social medias, and and nothing special, just with a few props of my own, and it takes a long time to set up. So those really beautiful posts that you see where you think, oh, this is gorgeous, this is what I need. Very few people, if anyone, has that in their life. So neat and perfect.
Well, and very few people have a way to have that set up all the time like that.
Yeah, unless you live alone, most of us live with, if not other people, animals, certainly, I live with both. I have a family, and for the most part, my children are a lot older now. So my youngest is 19 and my eldest is 21. So they're used to all of my weird witchy stuff and they just don't question anything anymore. But my dog, on the other hand, I have to be careful where I place certain stuff because he's a Patterdale Terrier and he is crazy. So if he sees a fly, he's all over the furniture. So, stuff would get broken.
Yeah, no, I have a cat too. And my biggest fear ever is him like catching his tail on fire by accident.
Yeah.
It's
the worry is real.
Yes, the worry is real. It's like I have long hair too, so I'm like, I don't want to catch my own hair on fire. I don't want to catch the cat on fire. Like, let's just be really careful. Plus, I live in an apartment building with like the most sensitive fire alarm in the face I've ever lived with ever. It's like I open the oven door and the fire alarm goes off. So like I have to be super careful now. It's the struggle is real in that regard, I guess. But I was just thinking about the social media posts, like, now I think authors kind of have to be like a one person show. Like, even though you're published with Llewellyn and you have a publicist and with them and all that, there's still a lot of marketing you have to do by yourself. Like you were talking about posting your book on social media and stuff. So how's that been? Because I know for a lot of writers, that is not the fun part.
Yeah, it's a real struggle for me. Like I was saying, I'm naturally an introverted person. I see kind of being an introvert and extrovert on a spectrum. So, self-promotion is not my forte. I find it very difficult to kind of talk about myself in that way. It's been hard, but it is necessary, and it's super necessary. And I think it's important that when you write a book, that you are able to talk to your readers, that they're able to connect with you as a real person. And I found that to be the best part of the promotion, meeting some fabulous people, really. So that's been the best part, but it is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, marketing is not my favorite thing either, which is partly why I started the podcast. I don't know if they've actually said this out loud to anybody yet on the podcast, but like, it was really like, advertising is difficult. And it's like, I just want to talk to other writers and what are they doing? And let's talk about what we're doing and figure it out, because it was much easier to have a conversation than to figure out how to do Amazon ads.
Yes.
So. It is there. I guess there is a tiny ulterior motive, but also really, I just wanted an excuse to talk to writers and let them promote their stuff. I mean, this is an easy way. I think podcasts are an easy way to talk about your work without feeling like you're promoting in the same way.
Yes, I think so as well. I do love doing podcasts. I think they're one of my favorite, besides writing, favorite mediums, because, I mean, when this goes out, there's going to be lots of people listening, but at the moment it's just me and you, and it's kind of relaxed, and it's kind of just like chatting to a friend, And of course, when it's about witchcraft and writing and books, I can talk the back legs off a donkey. So
right, exactly. It's like you got your tea or your coffee, and it's just like you said, like having a conversation with a friend across the table, kind of thing.
Yeah,
our table just happens to be both the United States and the Atlantic Ocean, but it's a pretty big table, but I like that too. Oh, so while you're working on the book, did you find that your practice changed or deepened? I would imagine writing during the pandemic, like you said, there were opportunities for that, but did you notice anything like specific while you were working on the book?
Yes. And I think it's weird when you get those moments of when you're thinking about something in that way, when you're writing and you're thinking because it's a weird kind of way to think. I struggle to describe it, but other writers, I guess, will know what I mean. And I found that writing about witchcraft at the same time as kind of trying to focus on my own individual practice in the time that was quite difficult for a lot of people. I don't know, I think it really allowed me to kind of draw a strength from it and a resilience, So during the lockdown, in that first lockdown in the UK, we were allowed out for like 1 hour a day exercise. And so for me, that became very much linked to my witchcraft practice. And then it became a part of my daily routine of writing as well, And I think in that way, witchcraft often is insidious because it seeps into every part of your life, whether you realize it or not, So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm always, when people say, what's your daily practice? And I'm like, I don't know how much of my day isn't somehow like a little infused, like you said, like it's just like any other system of practice or belief, like it kind of colors everything that you do. So what on your walks, like when you got to escape the house during lockdown, what did you do? If you feel like sharing that, I mean, that's something you want to share.
Well, I'm very lucky in that the town I live in is a rural town. And what I mean by that is like, it's very much urbanized in the way that most towns and cities are. So you can go into the town centre and there's, a Starbucks and whatever else you need to get. And, but then at the same time, it's rural in that I can go out of my front door and walk in any direction for around 10 minutes. And I'll be either in the woods or by the river or in a field somewhere. So there's plenty of open spaces among all of the, the sprawl of the concrete jungle. And so I was able to kind of mix it up. So some days would be spent by the river. Other days it would just be like walking the dog around a local field, But I think even on those small walks, it's easy to kind of find something to connect with in that local space. So for me, the land and animism is a major part of my witchcraft and obia. And so, connecting to the land where you live is, you can only do that by getting out and interacting with that land and that space. And so I felt that really deepened my connection. But I'm a woods kind of girl, like my home is in the woods. My ideal house would be a little ramshackle cottage in the middle of the woods somewhere with maybe a dog or 2 or 3 or 4. But yeah, and so I spent a lot of the time in the woods, and sometimes it was just walking, sometimes it was foraging. So I make ointments and stuff like that. Sometimes it would be collecting what was needed during those particular seasons. Sometimes it was just to get out of the house, you know. And so, like you were saying, there's different layers, and all of those things were linked to witchcraft, sometimes specifically for a purpose, and sometimes it was just a way of me connecting with the genius loci or just breathing.
Yeah. Oh, people complained here about lockdowns. We never had them like at the level that they did in the UK. Mm-hmm. So escaping was pretty easy. But I can imagine that in that kind of pressure cooker way of like, this is the hour you have to escape your house. Like you would want to make that as like, I don't know, it's like you have to fill the cup as much as you can possibly fill it in that hour. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing about like living with other people, you know, my family was a great source of resilience and strength for me in the hard times. But at the same time, when you live with a house full of people, it's sometimes, even when you love those people, sometimes you do just need, or I do anyway, I just need to have that little bit of time just to be, you know. I was speaking to a friend about it, and she said, you know what? She was saying that, because she has younger children, and she was saying sometimes when she is absolutely exhausted at the end of the day and the kids are in bed and her husband goes to bed, she said sometimes she just likes to, I'm sorry if you can hear my dog, I think someone's just come in. But she was saying that she likes to sit downstairs for about half an hour, and she's not doing anything in that time. Sometimes she's just watching some pointless TV show, but she's not even really watching it. It's just that time and space to decompress
by yourself.
And I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Oh, yeah. So we talked a little bit about this, but I guess kind of a more direct question, like when a reader picks this book up, what do you hope they walk away from after finishing it or dipping into it, or like what's your hope for what the reader gets from this book?
I hope that really they are inspired to kind of explore their own practical practice, you know, because I think that's important, that journey of self-discovery. And I think the book makes a nice framework for that, so people can dip in and out. And it encourages that practical, you know, the focus is on the practical, on the doing, you know, because that's really how we can then consolidate all of the theory that we read, you know, every day online in books. But also it allows you to kind of experience it and say, actually, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. So if people pick it up and they feel inspired to do something different or to explore their area with a new set of eyes or a different perspective, I think that's really the aim.
I like that. Have you had anyone kind of let you know, like, oh, they've made this recipe or they did one of the meditations?
Yes, I've had some lovely feedback. Mickey Mueller did a nice, and she made some of my Imolk incense. And what I really liked about that, I think it was on Instagram, and what I really liked about that was that she didn't have one ingredient. So, you know, she substituted it for something else. And I think really, because that is what witchcraft is. Witchcraft is adaptable. It's not just this set, you know, this one set way. So yeah, it's been really nice, and a few people have commented on the kind of breadth of the book, saying there's a lot of stuff in there, but it's precisely for that reason, so you can flick through and pick something that suits you in that particular moment.
And I think, I don't know, I love the approach of saying, you know, because I think, like I said, you know, early on, like 90s or whatever, coming to it, you came to books, you're like, oh, I have to do these 8, you know, rituals of the year, and I have to do something when the moon is dark, and I have to do something when the moon is full, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, I don't have time, or like my brain doesn't work that way, or like, I think, you know, especially if you're not in Western, Northern Europe, like some of those wheels of the year don't add up where you are. Like I'm in California and I can't tell you what the difference between spring and summer is here.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, really,
together.
Really the Sabbats are on the wheel of the year. It marks the British and European agricultural calendar, really, you know. And so I always think that, and this for me is where animism and the land become can really add an extra dimension to your practice, because it's about getting to know the land where you live and the cycles of the season where you live and what that looks like in the land, and adapting those celebrations to match that.
Yeah. And I like that the book gives, especially new folks, permission and like, no, really, you can do this how, check it out. This is what works for you is what works for you. You do not have to conform. I always remind people there's no witch pope. Like nobody's going to come down on you. If you do it your own way, there's no witch pope. So
I like that. Yeah. And particularly with the Wheel of the Year, because when I first started and, maybe you're not sure of the dates and all of this, or you miss it and you think, right, that's gone now and I can't do that. But actually for me, I often see those particular Sabbats, those dates as being, yes, it's a particular date, but actually it's a marker of the season, and really it's a seasonal thing, and you can do any of those workings at any of those times of that season. If you do it on the day, great, fantastic, woohoo. But like I said, real life often gets in the way for many of us.
Yeah. And even like, I was just thinking, like, I haven't practiced with a group for a long time with a coven or anybody. And like, it was like the closest Saturday, like very rarely did we meet on the day, because most people can't drop everything on a Wednesday night, with kids and work and all that. So we would do it on the weekend, and that was fine. So. Yeah,
that's it. It's about making it practical and adaptable. Like you say, there's no witch pope.
There's no witch pope. No one's coming in. No one's going to come in and inspect. I was like, there's no witch pope and there's no witch Martha Stewart to come and make sure you're doing it that way either. So, although I don't personally know Martha Stewart, but I do kind of wonder if she doesn't have some witchcraft based on what she's capable of doing. So, and also an army of people helping her. I mean, that's part of it. But my 24 hours in a day doesn't look like Martha Stewart's 24 hours in a day.
I bet many people don't.
Oh, so what is next on the horizon for you? What are you working on?
So I am currently writing book number 2 for Llewellyn, but that's very much in the first draft early phase.
Well, that's exciting though.
Yeah, it's exciting. And then, there's always the articles for the blogs and the websites. That's always ongoing. At the moment, and it's a good place to be in, I suppose, is, I don't know, maybe other writers get it to where I feel like when I approach the end of a project, I really have to focus on that project, because already I'm thinking, I'm getting ideas for something else, or the next book, or a book about this, or something will happen. And I think, aha, so there's always different things. But I have a podcast with my friend Jessica called Lilith's Left Hand, where we discuss a whole range of, so there's always something going on.
Always something going on, yeah. Busy witch, busy life altogether.
Yeah, and I kind of did that by accident, but I've just found, I guess it's easy when you love stuff, I like to write. I've always liked to write, and I love witchcraft, and it's a massive part of my life. So it's easy to spend a lot of time doing those things, Yeah.
And I do wonder, like, once you kind of step your toe into being kind of a public witch, like, I also think there is, I don't know that it's pressure, but I think it is, like you said, a drive to, like, once you've stepped out there, it's like, no, this is what I do now kind of thing too.
Yeah, because you kind of have to own it, because like the self-promotion stuff, it's kind of weird, being a public witch. It's a weird kind of thing to do in a way. And you kind of have to be kind of confident and strong in your practice, because there's always people who don't understand it, or I think the majority of people still have, when you say you practice witchcraft, or you talk about witches and witchcraft and magic, they tend to have the Hollywood ideas, of what it is. And then actually when you break, you get into those conversations with people, they actually go, oh, actually that's really interesting, oh, I'm into that. And so yeah, that's the good side of it. But it is kind of difficult, because there is I don't know, there is a kind of pressure, I think, to keep up with the social media posts. And for someone who, you know, I've always had like the social media, but I've always been kind of a lurker, or I like to read stuff, where I use it to keep in touch with family and friends who are all over the world, and that kind. I've never really been one to post a lot of my own personal stuff on there. And so having to post on a regular basis has been something that I've had to be quite strict with myself about, because it's not something that I would naturally do. But it's witchcraft stuff, and I found that actually I quite enjoy, you know, when I can share things that I like doing, or share some nuggets and people kind of comment and you can have that discussion. That's really lovely, actually.
Yeah. It has been, I mean, especially we moved during the pandemic. So this is California is new-ish for me. Gosh, we've been here 9 months or something. It still feels new. But I've found I've actually gotten to know more people through the podcast and through social media, kind of live here or are in the area than like probably I would have if we just moved here, like without that, you know, connection. It's a funny thing.
It is. And I find, you know, I've met some really genuinely nice people from being a public witch and being a writer, really supportive people. And, you know, and like I say, there's a lot of negative stuff about the internet. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I said, actually, you know, because they use the term internet strangers. And I'm like, well, they might be internet strangers, but actually some of those people I've never met in real life have been more supportive of my writing career than people I've known forever. And, you know, I don't necessarily mean just buying the book or spending money. I mean, they've shared articles, or they've liked them, or, you know, they've spoken encouragingly. So there's lots of positive sides to being out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. So speaking of that, where can people find you?
So I am on all of the social medias. I'm trying to get better at Twitter. Twitter is, I can only do that for small periods of time. But Emma Kathryn Wild Witchcraft on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. They can find me on my blog, Emma Kathryn Wild Witchcraft, and all of the sites I write for. So Gods and Radicals, and all of the others that you spoke about earlier.
Yeah, and we'll put notes for everybody. We'll put links in the show notes for folks so they can find that pretty easily. That'd be great. So my last question for you is a tiny game of chance based on my nosy Scorpio-ness and not knowing how to talk about the weather very well. So based on what I roll, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money, all that stuff we're not supposed to talk about.
How exciting.
And then if I roll 6, you get to pick which one. And I showed this to you before, but I will tell our listeners that I picked a purple one because Kathryn's book is a lovely shade of purple. So I picked a purple die today. Okay. So 3, religion. Not that we kind of haven't been talking about that in time yet. So this is a hypothetical. So you have joined the ancestors. What will we hope a very distant of you joining the ancestors lit witch need to summon you to their circle? And what writing advice will you give them?
Okay. So to summon me, they will need some rum. Rum and dark chocolate. That is all that is required to summon me. And I'm very easy to summon. It has to be the good stuff there. Yes.
We expect nothing less if you're trying to summon someone. You should,
right. And the advice I would give them, writing advice, right? The writing advice I would give them would be to just get it down on paper, to just write, because I think I spent so much of my beginning, even when I'd already had the first few articles and essays published, I was always second guessing myself. you know. And I can remember sending something to one of my editors at Gods and Radicals, and he got back to me and he said, Emma, it's really good, but it's so well polished. You don't have to do that. That's my job, you know. And I think that was just part of me kind of being too hypercritical of myself and not having that confidence to just write on the page. So yeah, just write.
Yeah, I think getting it out and turning off your internal editor is probably one of the hardest lessons most people learn about writing.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a long time.
Yeah. I was like, I pay an editor. I don't have to do that to myself. Not that I don't still do it, but I do pay an editor. So,
but it's like one of these things, right, that I do. And I think it's just part of my personality. So I was getting a new cooker, and it was one of those deals where you pay a little bit extra and the delivery men, when they're dropping your new one off, they'll take your old one away for you. Yeah. So the night before, I poured and not that it was terribly dirty, I like to think I'm quite clean, but I poured my cooker out and gave it a good clean inside and out, even though it was being taken away the next day. And my partner was like, Emma, why are you doing this? I'm like, because I don't want them to think I'm dirty. And he's like, well, it's not dirty. I'm like, I just have to do it. And I think it was the same for me with writing and editing, and it's been very hard for me to just get it on paper and send it away.
Yes. It's like, I don't want them to think I can't spell or that I don't know about, subject verb agreement just because I missed an S here, Yeah. No, I feel you on that totally. Well, Emma, thank you so much for being on the show. This was lovely. It was lovely to chat with you. And I'm excited for the book. I'm excited for new stuff coming. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I've had the best time.
Oh, good. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Keifel Agostini, who also designed our logo. Our music is Voices, composed for us by Alexander Shanekar. You can support our work, get early access to episodes, ask your own death, sex, religion, politics, money questions, and get some free stuff by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/witchlitpod. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at witchlitpod. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other witches find the show. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.